So in our last class, we attempted to use the golden ass and Ethiopica to illustrate the idea that African writing dates back to antiquity, right? And the idea is to counter the misconception that Africa did not have any form of writing that predated colonialism, or that we did not have any form of writing before the coming of the colonial masters. It is not true that we did not have any form of writing before the coming of the colonial masters. Even as we claim at the same time that the origins of our literature are oral. Alan Ricard, in an article entitled Africa and Writing, Alan Ricard, in an article entitled Africa and Writing, states that, quote, Africa is everywhere inscribed. Africa is everywhere inscribed. Implicit in this statement is the idea that pre-colonial Africa had some form of writing. Pre-colonial Africa had some form of writing. Meaning that we were not completely illiterate. We were not completely illiterate. We had some form of writing in pre-colonial Africa. These writings existed in the forms of signs, pictures, symbols, and drawings, among others. These writings existed in the form of signs, pictures, symbols, and drawings. Ancient Egyptians had a form of writing known as hieroglyphics. Ancient Egyptians had a form of writing known as hieroglyphics, which is a writing system consisting of hieroglyphs. A writing system consisting of hieroglyphs. A system of writing consisting of hieroglyphs, which means sacred carving, or the God's words. It is a combination of pictures, sounds, and other symbols to communicate meaning. It is a combination of pictures, sounds, and other symbols to communicate meaning. For instance, if someone says, I saw the river, it could be represented this way. So in that example, you see I, and then the I, and then the water being represented there. So how would you represent I saw two men? I saw two men. Supposing you were in the pre-literate era, you want to tell someone I saw two men. The idea that pre-literate Africa had its own system of writing is depicted in Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, especially in the way Onaka records his indebtedness. Pre-colonial Africa also had what is called the Nsebede script. The Nsebede script. It is thought to be one of the oldest writing systems in Africa. It was popular among the Ibibio and the Efik peoples in pre-colonial Africa. The Nsebede script was mostly used by Ibibio and Efik people in pre-colonial Africa. The Nsebede is a proto-writing system. The Nsebede is a proto-writing system made up of mostly pictograms, as well as logograms or syllabograms. The Nsebede is a proto-writing system made up of mostly pictograms, logograms, and syllabograms. It is thought to be the oldest form of writing in Africa. It is thought to be the oldest form of writing in Africa. It should be noted that the Nsebede scripts was mostly utilized by the elite of society and by a selected few. The Nsebede script was mostly utilized by the elite of society as well as a selected few. It was a closed system. It was not open to the public. The script was not open to the generality of the public. It was mostly used by secret societies like the Ekbe. It was also used by the security structures of society for secure communication purposes. This explains why the script is not available today. The colonial masters actually saw the usefulness, the value of the script, and studied them, curated them, and took the knowledge back to their libraries in Europe and America. The colonial masters actually saw the value of the script, infiltrated the secret societies, studied the language, studied the script, curated it, and took the knowledge back to Europe. So then the script could mostly be found in European and American libraries today, and a few that you can find on the internet. Only very few people of African descent have knowledge about the script, and most of you have only heard about it for the first time. So it shows somehow that we do not value knowledge in Africa. It's the white people who value knowledge, and that's why they saw the need to study that script. Over here, we will look down on it and say it is devilish. But what did they do? They infiltrated the secret societies, took the rights that was necessary for them to have access to the language, because that was the script they wanted, took the script, and then they went away. And now the knowledge is in their library. If you want to study the script, you go to the library in Europe or America. Okay, so I will expose you to some words from the script. For instance, mirror. So the existence of the scripts and other forms of writing suggests that pre-literate or pre-colonial African people were civilized against what the colonial masters wanted people to believe. Please note that there are two schools in the study of pre-colonial African writings. There are two schools in the study of pre-colonial African writings. There are two schools in the study of pre-colonial African writings. We have the inclusive school, we have the exclusive school. The inclusive school and the exclusive school. The inclusive school is of the opinion, scholars in the inclusive school are of the opinion that pre-colonial African writings should be included in the discussion of African literature. or that pre-colonial writing should be part of the discussion when talking about the development of African literature. That the only problem was that colonialism intervened. That the only problem was that colonialism intervened and arrested the development of these writings into an efficient writing system. That colonialism is to blame for interrupting the development of these writings into efficient writing systems, just like what you have with the English language. That's the opinion of the inclusive school. So these pre-literary writings, like the incipit scripts, like the hieroglyphics, should be discussed when talking about the development of African literature. So that we can say that had Africa been allowed to develop without the intervention of the Europeans, we would have developed our own system of writing and used it to write our literature, just like the English and the British, the Spanish did with theirs. That is the opinion of the inclusive school. Then the exclusive school. Scholars in the exclusive school are of the opinion that since African pre-colonial writing system did not develop into an efficient writing system, it should be excluded when discussing the development of African literature. The exclusive school scholars are of the opinion that since Africa's pre-colonial writing system did not develop into an effective writing system, it should not be included in the discussion of the development of African literature. But rather, we should use orature as the origins of our literature. We should use orature as the origins of our literature. We should say that our literature began as oral literature, just like any literatures around the world. The exclusive school and its scholars are of the opinion that we should use orature as a kind of literature that's not written down as the basis for discussing the development of African literature. Because all literatures around the world began as what? Since speech precedes writing. Since speech precedes writing. So, where would you like to belong? Is it the inclusive school or the exclusive school? So, most of the discussions that we've seen on African literature tend to go with the exclusive school. Because then we normally hear that our literature began with our oral tradition. Our literature began with our oral tradition, stories, narratives handed down from generation to generation through the word of the mouth. As can be seen in our myths, our legends, our folk tales, our songs, our chants, our dance, our proverbs, our riddles, our tongue twisters, and so on and so forth. So they constitute our oral literature. Now, oral literature is an important field in African literature today, because we don't want these tales to be lost. We want to collect them and put them into a more durable form. Maybe in videos, maybe in audio, maybe in writing. Okay? So you now see people go into the field. Maybe they go to the villages and record events. Maybe they record masquerade events. They record Ekpe Society events. They record the Women's Society, Women's Association events, and other traditional events. Because these events are dying out. They preserve them in videos, they preserve them in audios, and sometimes they even transcribe the text, the words spoken at the ceremony, to text, so that it will remain. They will first of all write it down in the indigenous language and then translate it into English. Okay? So transcription is the act of moving the words from its oral nature, from its oral texture, to its written form. That's transcription. So you listen to the audio, okay? Where the Igbo masquerade is making a statement that you recorded. And now, when you listen to that recording, you now write it down. First, in the indigenous language as the person said it. And then, after that, you now translate it into English. That's transcription. Moving the text from its oral form to its written form. You transcribe. And those words are valuable. Those words are treasurable. Okay, so you go to the village and you hear the masquerade making certain statements. Maybe making, that's poetry, that's pure poetry. Because the way they're saying it has rhythm, it has its own musicality, it has its own artistry. And if you're not a student of literature, then you won't understand how treasurable those words are. Those chants from the masquerade. They are carefully crafted words, they are poetry. And so imagine if you record them and preserve them for posterity. Okay? It has been done before by many scholars, most of them who were Europeans. In fact, the first set of people to study our oral tradition were the Europeans, because they saw the value. Even though they were going to church, they said that we were barbaric, we didn't have a religion, we didn't have culture. They were still recording those things. Their scholars were recording them and studying them. So you could see the hypocrisy of the colonial masters. Okay? They gather you in church and say, you don't have a tradition, you are from the devil, you're the children of the devil, except you repent. But the scholars are in the field collecting those treasurable moments. When the Igbo masquerades are out, when the women are out dancing and singing, they were recording them. So the Europeans were the first set of people to study oral literature. It's just that it's unfortunate that the economy has also affected the masquerades. Because the masquerades are not what they used to be anymore. Some of them even carry POS around. Okay? Some of them have ATM cards. They used to withdraw money at POS. Okay? I saw some masquerades, they drink cook. Masquerade, drink cook. The world is coming to an end. not even Kai Kai. Masquerades know the importance of juice. So like we don't have those good old masquerades again. Masquerades that we have now only know how to eat chicken. So, but there might still be some serious ones, all right, around that you can study. Some of the interior parts, modernity has not affected those masquerades yet. They're still pure masquerades, right? So that's how it is. So the source of our novel is oral tradition. The source of our novels is oral tradition. So when you now use the materials drawn from an oral tradition to write a novel, that makes that novel an authentic African novel, even though it is modern in the sense that it is written, right? The modern novel is a written novel, right? Good. But the Europeans cannot claim it because the material used in the writing is not theirs. The material is not theirs. The material is not European. We read the novels, we read Things Fall Apart, and we see our African proverbs, see African myths, see our folk tales that form the materials for the story. We see our own narratives. We see our own setting and our sensibilities in the novel. So it cannot be a European novel, even though it is written in English. After all, that English does not look like Queen's English or King's English. It is African English. So that is how to defend the existence of the African novel. That's how you defend the existence of the African novel. Because even though it is written using the European form of the novel, which is the book form, the soul of the novel, which is the material that you use to write it, is African, authentically African, because it stems from an oral tradition. So the fact that the novel is written in English does not make it a European or English novel, because that English is not Queen's English. Just English that has been modified, English that has been abrogated and appropriated to serve the needs of our environment. It's the English that understands our culture. The Englishman will not understand the English that we are using. Right? That's why when you speak to them, they keep saying, pardon, pardon, pardon. Right? Because you're not speaking their language. Even from the phonetics. Alright? So you tell the Europeans, I am going to the Yongshan. You say, what? Can you say that again? Will you please say that again? So I am going to the junction. And then you were like, so are you speaking English? And so you tell him, yes, I'm speaking English, but it is not your English. It is my English. All right, so if you don't understand, leave it. My brothers and sisters will understand. Okay? So that's how it works. So, the condition of the African novel today can be illustrated by us going back to look at the golden hours and Ethiopia. Going back to look at the golden hours and Ethiopia. The golden hours and Ethiopia are written in Latin and Greek respectively. The golden hours and Ethiopia written in Latin and Greek respectively. So the golden hours and Ethiopia are written in Latin and Greek respectively, but they depict African sensibilities by having an African setting and African heroes. With the Ethiopia and the golden hours, we can say that the language of the novel does not matter. What matters is the sensibilities of the novel sensibilities. That's what matters. What really matters? The novel sensibilities of the novel. So I'm saying all this in case someone asks you to defend the African novel tomorrow. You will know what to say, right? What then is the African novel? How should we define the African novel? We would define the African novel as an extended narrative in fictional prose. That deals with African subject matter, whether written by an African or not. An extended narrative in fictional prose that deals with an African subject matter, whether written by an African or not. So that means that the African novel can be written by an African or a non-African. But what makes the novel African is that it should have African sensibilities. That means it should have African setting, African characters, should tell an African story. Should tell an African story. So that's why we normally study Joyce Carey's Mr. Johnson in Nigerian literature because it depicts Nigerian characters, Nigerian setting, even though it is full of biases, racial biases. Okay? It is full of racial biases. We also study Joseph Conrad's Out of Darkness as an African novel because its major setting is in Africa, even though it's also full of racial biases in its utilization of language. C.A. Bitoye, in a 1994 article, C.A. Bitoye, in a 1994 article entitled Stages in the Development of African Literature, C.A. Ibitoye. C.A. Ibitoye, in a 1994 article entitled Stages in the Development of African Literature, supports the idea that African literature can have a non-African authorship as long as it depicts African sensibilities. Ibitoye's 1994 supports the idea that an African work can have a non-African authorship as long as it depicts African sensibilities. So we can now define the African novel as a fictional prose of considerable length. We can now define the African novel as what? A fictional prose of considerable length, either written by an African or non-African, but which is about Africa and depicts African sensibilities. A fictional prose of considerable length, either written by an African or non-African, but which is about Africa. That means the subject matter of the novel is Africa, and then depicts African sensibilities. That's how you should define the African novel. So the African novel can also be written in English or any of the colonial tongues, colonial tongues or languages. The African novel can be written in English. So if you want to write the African novel in English, write. It's still an African novel, right? But of course, you can also write it in indigenous language if you have the mastery, right? If you have the mastery, because the colonial masters came and imposed English on us and taught us English better than our indigenous languages. And Nigeria is still a colonial state, or at best a neo-colonial state, whose language of administration is still English. Language of education is still English. So you are taught English right from primary or nursery school to the university. And so when you now want to write a creative work, how will you be able to write in your indigenous language? You don't have the mastery. Those who write literature write in the language that they have the greatest mastery. Okay? Because you need to use the idiom of the language. You need to use the figure of speech in the language. You need to utilize all aspects of the language in your communication. So you cannot write in a language that you have not mastered, which is your indigenous language. You were hardly taught in your indigenous languages from primary school. So how can you write it? Everybody says, in fact, they say you must have a C in English to get into the university. That shows you the relevance of English. So today, and most of you, when you finish English, say the degree in English, you are likely to teach others how to use the language. So it's not tomorrow that we are going to change from English. It will take many years for that change to be complete. We will have to use our indigenous languages. Because each time we want to use an indigenous language, this one will say, what about our own? How can you use this one? You don't want to use this one. Okay? So that's how it works. So you will continue to write our creative pieces in English, but the English that is ours. Achebe says that the enduring effect of the colonial The enduring effect of the colonial project makes it inevitable for the African writer to resort to English at the point of writing. The enduring effect of the colonial project makes it inevitable for the African writer to resort to English at the point of writing. So you can't just help it. At the point when you want to express yourself creatively, you turn around and you look for any other language that you could use, but you don't have. The only language that you have is what? English. You like to express yourself in your indigenous language, but you don't even know how to write it. And if you write it, it doesn't make sense. Okay? Because you can't write it, you have not mastered the language. The enduring effect, that is, colonialism altered the destiny of Africa in many irreversible ways. All right? You're sitting like this, facing me, listening to the way I'm speaking. This is colonial education. All right? This is colonial education. This is a colonial education system. Our indigenous education system was practical. You were to be a farmer, you go to the farm. You were to be a palm wine tapper, someone who is tapping palm wine takes you straight to the palm wine tray and begins the lecture from there. I'm not supposed to sit here facing me. This is a colonial education system. You're supposed to be a hunter, straight to the bush. It's practical. And the worst part of it was that they gave us the kind of education that was devoid of technical or scientific knowledge. That was how bad it was. They had the knowledge for creating machines, using machines, producing machines. They didn't give us that one. They gave us the Bible. And so we should memorize verses. When we memorize these verses, then we are intelligent. They didn't give us the knowledge of science and technology that they have. So that's the colonial education system. So that's why Achebe uses appropriation and abrogation in writing so as to change the English language in such a way as to bear the cultural sensibilities of Africa. So African writing has come a long way. The African novel has come a long way from its humble beginnings in the 20th century or even the 19th century. It has come a long way. The African writers are winning awards like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Chinua Achebe, Isido Ogbewo, Amadako, Muhiwa Thiongo, a great man. One of Ngugi's novels that I would like you to read is Wizard of the Crow. Wizard of the Crow. We read that. I think it is his masterpiece. One of his greatest novels, Wizard of the Crow. When you read Wizard of the Crow, you realize that the African novel has come of age. Okay? In size and quality. But why did Africans start writing in the first place? Why did Africans start writing in the first place? Because you see, the first set of people to write about Africans were the Europeans. After all, they had access to a better writing system, which they had developed. The first set of people to write about Africans were the Europeans. In guys like Joyce Carey, Joseph Conrad, so when African scholars read what they wrote about us, they wanted to react. All right? They wanted to counter. So we can say that the African novel is reactionary in nature. The African novel is reactionary in nature. The African novel is reactionary in nature. For instance, Achebe said that he was motivated to write Things Fall Apart after reading what Joyce Carey wrote about Nigerians in Mr. Johnson. You know, Mr. Johnson is a Nigerian character, but its depiction only shows the negative side of the Nigerian character. Mr. Johnson is depicted as incompetent, as lazy, as a loafer. Only good for partying, going into indebtedness, stealing from his master, and finally dying a disgraceful death. So that is a European depiction of a Nigerian. So when Achebe decided to write, he uses Okonkwo to counter the depiction of Mr. Johnson. Okonkwo is hardworking, honest, brave, not a coward like Mr. Johnson. Takes himself from the lowest point to being one of the richest, one of the most respected elders in the land. So you can compare the character of Okonkwo and that of Mr. Johnson to see the difference between how Joyce Carey depicts the Nigerian character and how Achebe depicts the Nigerian character. African writings in the modern time, African writings in the modern time go as far back as the 18th century. An example of a work published, an example of an African work published in the 18th century is Equinus Travels. Equinus Travels. The full title of the work is The Interesting Narrative of the Life and Adventure of Olaudah Equiano. The Interesting Narrative of the Life and Adventure of Equiano, or Gustavus Vassa, or Gustavus Vassa. Gustavus Vassa. The African. The African. The full title of the work is The Interesting Narrative of the Life and Adventure of Olaudah Equiano. Olaudah. Olaudah Equiano. Or Gustavus Vassa, the African. Published in 1789. Published in 1789. So the author, Olaudah Equiano, was of a Nigerian descent, who was captured as a slave and taken to the Europe and the New World. So in the work, he's describing his experience as a slave, beginning from when he was captured to when he was able to regain his freedom. So one of the themes in the work is slavery. One of the themes in the work is slavery, which is one of the crimes against African people by Europeans. In Equiano's travels, the author documents his own personal experiences of being captured in Africa as a slave. It was around Edo. He was from around Edo or Benin kingdom. He was captured as a slave as a young boy, and he lived most of his life as a slave until he was able to regain his freedom, buy his freedom from his masters. And Equiano's Travel is one of the works that protested against slavery. So you can protest with the work of literature. He uses the experience as a slave to draw attention to the atrocities associated with slavery when the work was published. In the 19th century, we had a publication entitled O.S. Cravaux. O.S. Cravaux. In the 19th century, we had a publication entitled O. Escravo. The novel, the title means the slave. The slave. It was published in 1856 by Evaristo da Almeida, O. Escravo. O. Escravo was written in Portuguese. So you could see that the theme is still slavery. In the 20th century, we had another major publication by Joseph Ephraim Kesley Hefert. The prose text is Ethiopia Unbound. Ethiopia Unbound. Its subject matter is racism and the need to liberate Africans from racism. In 1941, there was another major publication, this time from the Gold Coast. The novel is entitled 18 Pence. The novel is entitled 18 Pence by R.E. Obeng. By R.E. Obeng. It was published in 1941. It is one of the earliest African novels. One of the earliest African novels published in Africa. In 1938, there was another publication entitled Forest of a Thousand Demons. Forest of a Thousand Demons by D.O. Fagunwa. The novel has the same texture. This work has the same texture as Amos Tutola's The Palm Wine Drunkard. As Amos Tutola's The Palm Wine Drunkard. Because it deals with fantastic tales. The Palm Wine Drinker was published in 1952 by Amos Tutola. It talks about a prince who loves to drink palm wine, but lost his best palm wine tapper to death and has to travel to the land of the dead to find him, and the adventures that he had during his journey to Death's Town and his return, his eventual return. In 1958, we had the publication of Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. In 1958, we had the publication of Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. It is one of the greatest novels written from Africa, and the novel deals with the pre-colonial and the colonial experiences in Africa. In 1984, we had another major publication, and that is The Last Imam by Ibrahim Tahir. So, as this novel has a northern origin, we also have Season of Migration to the North, published in 1966 by Tahib Saleh. So, we are going to pause there for today. When we come back next week, we'll check another aspect of the course. So, you take some minutes break and then we continue the next course.